Hello, my name is Colum Ruane, and today I'm going to present on global English ideologies and communities, exploring perspectives from a group of Korean English language users. Here's an overview of what I'd like to cover. So first I'd like to briefly situate English in the world and then in the Korean context, and then proceeding all the way down to the conclusion which highlights our reality of English in the world and tensions in the local context. As most people would recognize, English is the most widely used and learned language in the world. It serves a unique role in knowledge acquisition, formulation, and provision worldwide, which has led Saraceni to state that it is an unalienable part of the lives of the people who use it. However, there has been some contention highlighted with regard to its global spread, notably Philippson's linguistic imperialism, which is one of the more widely known criticisms on the spread of English in the world. This states that as English has become the international gatekeeper to education, employment, and social mobility, a functional and symbolic primacy is reinforced at the expense of local agency and culture. This can lead to new orders of socio-economic hierarchization within local or peripheral contexts. However, critics of these imperialist views see them as too deterministic, falling short of the complex nature of English at a local level, thus disregarding local agency, rendering learners powerless in their language pursuits. A macro level perspective, which is the view of linguistic imperialism, can overgeneralize and can be inadequate to examine how non native English speakers can transform English as a post colonial language for their own pursuits. Another perspective on this highlights the existence of an internal hegemony, whereby structures at the local level internalize language practices that can perpetuate an English hegemony. Therefore, the role of the English language in any local context should be evaluated with respect to its socio-cultural flows in order to fully comprehend the unique social practices at play in the adoption of the English language. One such country that has a unique history and relationship with English is South Korea, or Korea. Globalization, or Seigehwa, was a key turning point for Korea and its implementation of English learning across the country. With Korea's strong intent of launching itself onto the international stage in the late 20th century, English became the language to propel Korea onto the global stage. It was perceived that English was a symbol of upward and economic mobility and global access. This led to an intensity for English and resulted in it being implemented across the public education system. This overall zeal for achievement and English resulted in the term English fever in Korean society, in which there was an intense focus on the learning of English and how it can determine or was seen to determine success in Korean society. TOEIC scores began to be associated with access to the job market and even used for access to universities in order to attract high caliber students, and also for graduation, where students had to pass English modules in order to graduate. The private market for English also became a booming industry with its yearly worth in the billions of dollars. The prestige of English became a significant factor where speakers who had good ability were lauded, while individuals who didn't have such ability engaged in self-deprecation for not achieving the heights of being able to speak English or their perception of what that is, generally a native English speaker style. It should also be noted that a neoliberal ideology has also had a significant impact on how English is placed within Korea or understood within that context. A neoliberal ethos requires the individual to endlessly engage in self-development. So with English, they place the burden upon themselves so that they need to endlessly upgrade their linguistic skills. Entering into this neoliberal loop perpetuates the idea that whatever competence they have is never enough, and the constant raising of the competence bar becomes an implicit aspect of life, further naturalizing the recalibration of what is considered valued linguistic capital. In the Korean job market, the promise of English can be an illusion, as its fulfillment is constantly deferred. Cho underscores that linguistic ideologies within neoliberalism can confine people's choices rather than expand them. However, Park indicates that within neoliberal ideologies, it is possible that the embeddedness of language in a social context is minimized, leaving only a standard dedicated and committed English learner In the presence of global aspirations, the personal attributes of the language can become accentuated, creating an individuated global personhood. However, although English still carries with it vivid images of the West, for learners it has also become a symbol of global culture and global vitality. This has been noted in a number of Korean-focused studies that have shown how English represents something youthful and globally focused for its users. But we can also see this with how English's global use within the rhythms of globalization has been linked to new expressions of identity. This has brought up conversations about English user empowerment and English appropriation, in that, is it a native speaker language or just everybody's language? This focuses conversations on the context of use, as English is used a lot more among non-native English speakers than native English speakers, especially within English as a lingua franca contexts. So when individuals are learning or using English, who exactly are the target speakers in their minds? English has also been pinpointed as a medium for local and diverse cultural representation. This especially has been highlighted in terms of its use in media and music, with numerous studies showing how it is used to disseminate new possibilities and interpretations of local culture into the world. Chan, for example, indicates how the use of English in Hong Kong pop music functions beyond Western symbols of culture and is rather used as a poetic device to express highly nuanced, localized meanings that can also attract an international audience. With that in mind, as social creatures, we are complicit in the global process. However, our contemporary systems of communication and connectivity have exploded in the last few years and can be exemplified by increased virtual encounters, increased access to world media, and increased global mobility. And Marlena emphasizes the effect of this situation when indicating that growth in trans-world movement, both physical and virtual, allows people to culturally, psychologically, and ideologically engage with each other. Essentially, the movement of people and the sharing of ideas and culture results in a global system that is not static, but is one that is in constant flux, which comes about through interrelated influences that stretch across our many local contexts. Within this intensified global paradigm, people are faced with new realities, and it is here that we can interpret people's experiences through a cosmopolitan perspective. While cosmopolitanism does assume internationalism, the local perspective gets drawn into the international perspective a lot more and can become a significant point of departure for people when engaging with the world. As Beck states, the either inside or outside that underlies the distinction between national and international is transcended by a both inside and outside. This can lead to a reflexive globality, which is a critical stance and a constant realignment of one's position. An individual engages their environment through their own sense of self and their own experiences. With all that in mind, while many of the themes concerning English in the world are not new, it is essential to recognize how the environments in which speakers use the language evolve. It is here then that we need to recognize that new perspectives can emerge in congruence with the evolving environments of usage, and how again that recognition can inform how we engage and understand not only current but new learners of the English language as we engage each other in a more visibly diverse global space. It is within this frame that I was interested to look at the English language in the contemporary world and how we can draw new perspectives on its ideology from recognizing new layers of its usage, especially from the people who use it as a second language in their everyday lives. The issues discussed today are part of a larger study that explored a group of Korean nationals' perceptions of the cultural framing and utility of global English. I talked with them across multiple issues inclusive of globalization, world Englishes, aspects of culture and identity. But today I'm just going to highlight some of the points or major points they talked about in terms of the utility of English in the global context and the Korean context, and also aspects of English and identity and their sense of global integration. So it was a qualitative study overall across 8 months. I engaged the participants in semi-structured interviews and reflective journals. There were 7 South Korean nationals, all female, aged between 23 and 30. They were all self-selected. There was no particular focus on female participants. And all of the participants were studying majors related to English. So I wanted that focus within their experiences. Okay, some of the findings. When I asked the participants about English's role in the world, responses had a strong emphasis on the notion of English being a tool or asset among many tools to be used to navigate and also integrate into the world. Some of the key themes or ways they talked about it were a tool for global togetherness, a tool for global access, and a tool for global information. We can see this stand out in Caroline's comment. I feel like when I'm using English, it can bring me closer to the world. I can meet people and I can definitely think about working in many places outside Korea. Interestingly, in their responses, there was a strong focus on the global context rather than a specific local context, in that a native English speaker context. We can see this being emphasized in Jen's comment through her use of English within a global environment, or the impact it had on her. When I was young, I just thought I'd use English with native speakers. But when I went abroad, I feel a bit of an idiot. I became realistic. People just use it normally with anybody, right? We collectively use it with native speakers and non-native speakers, and that makes us understand better, I think. However, at the same time, while the participants place significant emphasis on English's place within the global context, they also stress that it is not the only way to engage with or gain an understanding of the global world. Increasing technological means and increasing visibility of other languages, lending to information increasingly available in many other languages, were standout points mentioned. We can see this in Caroline's comment, for example, in which she highlights how the internet allows us to connect and know more around us. It was generally expressed that these various other means of navigating the world allow for more open-minded engagement with it, rather than just relying on or expecting English to be the means to traverse the world and connect with people. People overall can adapt their own patterns of connection, and we can see this in Siena. I think Koreans should have the ability to discover the world themselves and not feel forced to just use English. They might get the wrong idea or concept about English and globalization. Concerning the Korean context, perspectives were not too far from the literature. The participants commented that English is especially influential in terms of economic and social mobility within Korea, and interestingly was spoken about in regards to being a commodity within that context. We can see this in Jen's comment with referring to English in terms of an addition to their spec, or Korean spec, which is a word that describes an individual's, say, self-specification. It was stressed by the participants overall that English has a significant influence in the Korean context and in Korean people's lives, to the point that it can be framed as being part of the culture. It has a sense of embeddedness. There was a strong emphasis on English being a measurement tool for companies to gauge success, which in some ways highlights a local hegemonic perspective on its use. Also, competent speakers can feel a sense of social elitism, with less competent speakers looking upon them in envy, which I think Rachel summarizes quite nicely in her comment above. Koreans are exposed to the idea that English is so important, so it makes them think that if somebody has good skills, they kind of say, oh, your English is so good, you're so intelligent, you're so smart. Even if they are not so smart, English is just to show off something. However, and significantly, attention was also expressed within their responses concerning English in the Korean context. The tension expressed by the participants is between the global and local context, and is an outcome of the outdated education system for English in Korea. There is a disjoint in their opinion between what Koreans receive and what they need in terms of value English for the world. It was expressed that English education in Korea is generally more focused on the local competitive market, which can lock Koreans into a very methodical approach to using the English language. This very pragmatic, focused approach to English is doing an injustice or a disservice to the population in their opinions. Caroline highlights a globally engaged Korean population that is stuck in a system that perpetuates antithetical motives towards what global English represents, or what it should represent. The root of our education is totally wrong. We are too systematic. We've made English important, but for the wrong reasons. Like, we have a fever for tests to get jobs, but we experience a lot more now through globalization and the internet. That's the world we live in. So we need to use English, speak it, understand it, know to do that. But many Koreans don't have that. It was generally expressed by the participants that English has become a form of linguistic production where choice has been removed and feelings of resentment can grow towards the language. They expressed that the global community is not distant but is active within their local communities. Okay, some perspectives on their identity. When initially asking them about the concept of global identity or citizenship, it was a somewhat confusing or even vague concept for some of the participants, as it was expressed, why would that even be a label? Isn't everybody just a citizen? Nonetheless, when talking about their identities, each participant focused on experiences from both local and global contexts, in that experiences home and abroad continually inform their self-concepts. Being Korean was a significant part of how they would construct a global orientation, which essentially echoes back to notions of unique individuated personhoods. Jen's comment was typical of how this was expressed. I realize that I'm proud of myself as being Korean and have admired the thought of being a global citizen based on the idea of being Korean. I am sure this would help to create a global citizen, the combination of Korean culture and ideas of the global. In Rachel's case, although at first glance it may seem she rejects a global identity as she has a strong focus on being Korean, she aligns her identity more with her personal experiences which exist within the Korean context and international context. Although I still don't see myself as a global citizen because probably I feel a strong community solidarity as a Korean, I do see myself as a cosmopolitan person in that my identity has been constructed through my very personal experiences as myself rather than as a Korean. So we can see in that how that local idea and global idea are very much mixed together. So her experiences inform her idea of identity rather than this idea of from the local into the global, which doesn't exist or didn't exist for many of the participants in their expressions as well. Interestingly, when asked about English's role in this, in being a global citizen, they all, to varying degrees, pointed out that English is not an essential element in carving out a global identity, in that English is not the central or overarching focus. For them, a sense of global orientation or identity is more self-ascribed through one's own experiences and agency. And we can see this with Jan. I don't necessarily feel more international because I can speak English. It helps a lot, yes, but it's up to me to decide a global identity. Curiosity, I think. Okay, conclusion. So a few points we can take from this. Pervasive technological innovations are becoming a significant factor in our everyday lives. This can allow for evolving ways to consume the world and relate to a wider range of people, and I argue can lend to new ways to reimagine ideologies and use of English, as we saw from the participants. Greater social mobility also can bolster awareness of one's own voice to express or interpret one's own sense of global orientation. This can involve distancing from notions of a global identity in terms of an elusive ideal, in this case English. Through more global engagement, learners may not see themselves as deficient users of English, but are more conscious of how they are interfacing with the world through multiple self-orientated means. This orientation draws in many culturally orientated assets into their worldview, which can also be interpreted as being plugged into a tacit undercurrent of a cosmopolitan connectedness. We don't necessarily see uniqueness in the ways that we digest and engage the world, but it is just there all around us. We influence and evolve with the global context, which is both near and far simultaneously. And we can see this play out with the participants' views on English in the Korean context, the tension that they described, in that misalignments exist between the Korean English education system and the global use of English. The English received is not the English needed. Rather, the Korean English education system should position an ideology of English that is a collaboration and not a conflict with the global world, and it should support an encouragement of global representations of language and learning that help reconcile global local beliefs and attitudes, so representing the students as they are living every day. So just to finish up with this question, to what degree are these notions visible in your learning, student, or even social contexts, either by way of policy, which may reflect a more open or restrictive perspective on English learning, or in English learners themselves, who may be displaying more outward global orientations as everyday identity markers? Thank you. So here are my references if you'd like to take a screenshot. Gora Mila Mahagiv.